Let's talk about direct and indirect objects today. Those really little words that can really throw us off when we're not sure what they're doing in a sentence as we are learning Spanish. Now, for the most part, direct and indirect objects, I'm going to be going over things with you on the noteboard page. But direct and indirect objects are what in Spanish are the equivalent of the English words for it, him, her, them when we're referring to something that we've already talked about, so we know who it is that we're talking about or what it is that we're talking about, and we want to refer to it again without repeating the whole thing. So when we want to refer to it, him, her, them, that is when we need to use a direct or an indirect object. Let's go over really quickly what they look like and where we're going to use them. All right, so when it comes to picking a direct or an indirect object, first you need to know what to pick from. So our direct objects are me, te, lo, la, nos, o los, las. Our indirect objects are me, te, le, nos, les. You will notice that me, te, and nos are the same between direct objects and indirect objects. So that means context is really going to help you when you're figuring out if you're trying to analyze backwards from Spanish to English and you're figuring out if it is a direct or an indirect object, if for some reason you're doing a grammar exercise on a sentence. However, when it comes to picking it, you're in pretty good shape because those three are all going to be the same, whether you're looking for a direct or an indirect object. Now, the major differences here are when we're dealing with a third person. So if it's a direct object, we are going to be choosing between lo or los or la or las. If it's an indirect object, that's when we're going to be choosing between le or les. So you'll notice if our subject is plural, I shouldn't say our subject, if our object is plural, it's going to have an S on the end, either way, los, las, or les. If it's singular, it won't. And that third person are really where there's a lot of possibilities. So the third person could stand for it, a thing, or it could stand for you, formally, the usted form, or it could stand for some other person, a him or a her. Same thing over here as an indirect object. It could be an it could be a you formal, or it could be a him or a her. Same thing in the third person plural, multiple possibilities, could be an it, depending on how we translate it into English. There are some things that are plural in Spanish, grammar-wise, but when we translate it into English, we would still use the word it. And so that's why that's here too. But the plural third person could be talking to a group of people, you all, or it could be talking about either people or things, in which case we refer to them. Same thing down here as an indirect object. It could be you all, or it could be about other people or things. All right, now that you know what direct objects and indirect objects are, how do you know when you have one? Well, first of all, a direct object receives the direct action of the verb, which means a really good way of determining a direct object is asking yourself the question, who or what was something? And so let's look at some verbs. We've got dar, decir, and leer. Dar, to give, decir, to say, and leer, to read. So I might look at dar and say, who or what was given? That's my direct object. Decir, who or what was said? In this case, it's probably going to make a lot more sense to ask what was said. And that's my direct object. Leer, who or what was read? Probably going to make more sense to say what was read here too. And all of those are going to be my direct object. So dar, what was given? A gift. A gift was given. Great. The gift is my direct object. Decir, what was said? My name is Nikki. That's what was said. Okay. Leer, what was read? A book. A book was read. Beautiful. Those are all my direct objects. Hold on to them, and we're going to go into them in step 3. Now, an indirect object is something that receives the action of the verb indirectly. So a better question for an indirect object is, was the action done to or for anybody or thing? Now, it's not always necessary to have a direct object or have an indirect object, but Sometimes you may have a direct object and not have an indirect object. Sometimes you may have an indirect object and not have a direct object. So, was the action done to or for anybody or anything? Let's look at it with our verbs. Was the gift, remember from up above, was the gift given to or for anybody else? Yeah, usually when there's a gift giving involved, it's given to somebody else, even if it's given to yourself. So absolutely, there's going to be an indirect object here. Now, what was said, right? Hi, my name is Nikki. Okay. Was this sentence, hi, my name is Nikki, was it said to or for anybody else? Probably. I don't just walk around saying, hi, my name is Nikki to myself. I'm going to say it to somebody else. So yeah, it was done. It was said to somebody else. Leer. Okay. Now this one, maybe. So we said a book is what was read. Was the book read to or for anybody else? Now, it's very possible to just read a book without reading it to anybody else or for anybody else. But it is possible. Maybe you're reading something out loud to somebody else. Maybe you're reading a bedtime book to a kid. So it's possible. It totally depends on the situation, but not necessary. We'll come up with an example of each. All right. So remember, from dar, we said a gift was given. So over here, un regalo is a gift and el regalo would be the gift. And I'm including this article here because it's going to make it easier to match with the appropriate direct object. Decir, what was said? Hola, me llamo Nikki. I said, my name is Nikki. I decided to put this in Spanish to be consistent. So this is just a phrase or a sentence. And to break it down more explicitly, it's hola, me llamo Nikki. That's what was said. And we said, okay, what was read? How about a book? So un libro, a book, or el libro, the book. Again, this is going to make it easier for you. All right, so let's take these examples and put them in context of a sentence. Now, I thought it would be fun to use current student names. So if you see yourself in here, that is why. All right. Lori le dio un regalo a Ubina. Se lo dio para la Navidad. Excellent. Now, I'm just going to translate that before we get into breaking it down. Lori gave a gift to Ubina. She gave it to her for Christmas. Awesome. Very nice, Lori. All right, second example. Nikki le dijo a Miguel, hola, me llamo Nikki. Miguel le respondió, mucho gusto. If you can translate these before I do, by the way, go for it. All right, Nikki said to Miguel, hi, my name is Nikki. Miguel responded, nice to meet you. Third example. Linda leía el libro. Lo terminé en 2 días. There's a lot of alliteration going on here. Linda read the book. She finished it in 2 days. Must have been a good book. All right, now I'm going to pop up some more examples on the screen and we'll get into a little bit more of this breakdown. Hang in there with me. We're almost there. All right, now we've got our examples. We know what they mean, and I'm going to go over a bit of grammar breakdown. I'll go over quickly, but this is a video, so feel free to refer back or ask me follow-up questions whenever you need. One thing I want to point out as a good language coach before we move on though, is if you can read these sentences in Spanish, there's no need to walk through this grammar breakdown. In fact, the more you try and break the sentences apart, take things out of context and translate each little word for word, it makes it harder for you to acquire the language. Because trust me, your subconscious is really, really good at picking up patterns in things like second languages. So if you can understand when you encounter a direct or an indirect object in context, like in each of these sentences, and you can translate the whole sentence and understand what it's saying, there's no need to go any further. Stop there. Keep going with your Spanish input, with your conversation, with what you're reading. You are learning Spanish and you are learning how to use direct and indirect objects correctly. However, here comes the grammar breakdown. All right, in this first one, correctly identify our indirect objects? All right. Le. Le is an indirect object, and this is coming into play because Lori gave a gift to Hobina. Now, the gift is the direct object. I'm not using a direct object replacement here. I'm using the whole thing. I'm saying un regalo. So I don't need to go over here yet because I'm still spelling out exactly what it is. This, remember from my first line of this video, is when we need to refer back to something that we already know we're talking about. All right, so Lori gave a gift to Hobina. What she gave was the gift, but she gave it to Hobina. Now, I needed to include that information because I didn't know who Lori gave the gift to. So I put a Hobina, to Hobina here, and I spelled it out, but I am still going to include my indirect object because yes, whenever something is done indirectly to or for somebody or something, we do include the indirect object. Now, this is where English speakers can get a little confused because in English we just say, Lori gave a gift to Hobina. But our English brains, if we tried to translate this literally, this would say Lori to her gave a gift to Hobina. And our English brains would tell us that that's wrong. We don't say Lori to her gave a gift to Hobina. But guess what? In Spanish, we do. In Spanish, that redundancy to her and to Hobina in the same sentence is just considered consistent. If the to Hobina part is there, the to her part has to be there too. However, if the to her part is there, but we already know who her is, we don't have to include Hobina again. All right, so if we say somebody, we have to include the indirect object, but we don't always have to include the somebody when we have the indirect object if we already know who we're talking about. So Lori gave a gift to Hobina. Beautiful, there's our indirect object, and there she is again, consistency. Now, there is both a direct and indirect object in this sentence. One of them is hiding. It's a special case. Se lo dio para la Navidad. Se is our indirect object, but it's not on this list. I'll get into it. Lo is our direct object. It's over here. Now remember what this sentence meant. Se lo dio para la Navidad. She gave it to her for Christmas. All right. Lo is our it. Dio is the she gave. So she gave it. And why did I pick lo? I picked lo as my direct object because what was given? A gift. A gift, you'll see here, is a masculine word. It's el, and it's singular. It's just one gift. So going over here, I want to pick the singular masculine it, and that is lo. So if we have an el regalo, if we have a masculine word where the article is el, it becomes lo in a direct object. If we have a feminine word where the article is la, like la pluma, the pen, then it becomes la as a direct object. Same thing if it's plural. If I was talking about los regalos, then I would have picked los. If I was talking about las plumas, I would have picked las. So the lo is here because I had a singular masculine thing, el regalo o un regalo, and so I picked lo. All right, she gave it to her for Christmas. I need that to her part. This is my indirect object, and I'm going to take you down here to direct your attention to a special case. If we ever have an indirect object followed by a direct object where they both begin with L. So from our list, that could look like either a lay or a lace from the indirect object list, followed by a lo la or a los las from the direct object list. Any of those combinations where both of these begin with L, we are going to not let them be. We're going to change the indirect object, whether it was lay or lace, we're going to change it to say. Now, what that does is it just makes it a little bit easier to say and differentiate the sounds. And that is just what we do in Spanish. So because here we would have used le for a Jobina, because again, Jobina is a third person. She's somebody else. She's a her. And I would have referred to her with le, just like I did in the first part of the sentence. That would have left me with le lo dio. And in Spanish, we don't like that. We don't leave le lo. We don't leave any two combinations of an indirect object and a direct object that both begin with L. So the indirect object has changed to se. Se lo dio para la Navidad. All right. Lori gave a gift to Jobina. She gave it to her for Christmas. Again, if you've got the meaning of it, just keep going. All right. Nikki le dijo a Miguel, hola, me llamo Nikki. Fantastico. Now, same thing going on here. Nikki said to Michael or to Miguel, and I needed to put a Miguel because otherwise, if I just said Nikki le dijo, I wouldn't know who Nikki said something to. So I included a Miguel, so we know that Nikki said something to Miguel, but the fact that there was an indirect object and she said something to somebody else is also going to mean that I put the indirect object in that sentence. And again, Miguel is a third person, so he's not you or me. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to pick le for him. And now I've got Nikki le dijo a Miguel. Again, a really literal translation might be Nikki to him said to Miguel, and we wouldn't say that in English, but in Spanish, we do. It's consistent. Nikki said to Miguel, hola, me llamo Nikki. Now, just a quick note here for you too, if you're wondering, if it was Nikki said to us, then yeah, it would have looked like Nikki nos dijo. If it was Nikki said to me, it would be Nikki me dijo. If it was Nikki said to you, Nikki te dijo. So that indirect object is absolutely going to change according to who the action was done to or for. All right, so with this first sentence, we know that Nikki said to Miguel, hi, my name is Nikki. Now the second sentence is going to make sense based on the first sentence. Miguel le respondió, mucho gusto. Miguel said to her, or Miguel responded, nice to meet you. Now, at no point here do I say, Miguel le respondió a Nikki. But it wasn't necessary. It makes sense because Nikki started this conversation with Miguel. I can assume that when I just say Miguel le respondió, that he's responding to the person who just talked to him. This to her is standing in for to Nikki. But if I just say Miguel responded to her, you would know what I was talking about in English. Same thing in Spanish. Miguel responded to her, mucho gusto. Nice to meet you. Now, one other thing. In English, we drop our indirect objects a lot. When we do a he said, she said, we don't say he said to her, she said to him. We just say he said, she said. Same with responded. But in Spanish, we're much better, we're much more consistent about using an indirect object if the action was done to or for anybody or anything. So you're going to often see indirect objects in conversations where people are talking to each other. Something was said to somebody else, or somebody responded or asked somebody else. You're going to see an indirect object. All right. Moving on to our third example, we had the book is what was being read. And we said most often we're not reading a book to or for anybody else. So here's an example where we're not reading to or for anybody else. Linda leía el libro. Linda read the book. Great. Lo terminé en 2 días. She finished it in 2 days. Now, if you did not have this first sentence and all you had was lo terminé, oh, sorry, guys, this should say lo terminó. You have to catch me on this stuff. All right, that looks better. Thanks so much for your help. Lo terminó en 2 días. She finished it in 2 days. It did say I finished it in 2 days, and that doesn't make sense because we were talking about Linda. If all you had was this second sentence and you didn't have the first part, you wouldn't know what was going on. Lo terminó en 2 días. You would know it meant somebody, he or she or you formally finished it in 2 days, but you wouldn't know who was finishing something because you don't have an explicit subject in the sentence, and you wouldn't know what it was. So if you find yourself reading, more likely this is going to happen when you're reading, but if you find yourself reading or in a conversation and you don't know what the lo is referring to, you don't have enough information, go back. Go back in the video, go back in the story, in the article, whatever it is, to find out who were we talking about and what were we talking about. That is going to carry over into the next sentences where we're referring back to those things with implicit subjects and direct or indirect objects. All right, now I did promise you another example where someone was reading something to somebody else, so let me add that in. All right, so here are a couple more possibilities for you. Besides this first one that we already went over, Linda me leía el libro. What was she reading? The book. But who was she reading it to? Was she doing this to or for anybody else? Yeah, in this case, Linda me leía el libro. Linda read the book to me. Linda le leía el libro a su nieta. Oh, Linda read I was going for Spanglish there. Linda read the book to her granddaughter. All right, now you might notice something here. Again, if I've got a le and I've got a su nieta, I'm clarifying who I'm talking about. I'm always gonna have the le if it's done to somebody else, but I'm also gonna clarify who that somebody else is if I need to. So I say a su nieta, to her granddaughter, and her granddaughter is gonna be a singular her, so I've put the le in there also. And just in case you're wondering, I know this sounds like alliteration because it is, le leía, but it is not this. It is not an indirect object followed by a direct object. So this le stays exactly the same. Now, up here in this middle sentence, Linda me leía el libro. I could have added Linda me leía el libro a mí, but it is not necessary because when I pick an indirect or a direct, but when I pick an indirect object like me, te, or nos, but when I pick me or te, there is no confusion about who that is. Me is me, te is you. So I don't need to say to me that she read the book to me. When I say she read the book to me, there's no confusion about who me is. It's the speaker. Same thing with te. Now, if I say nos, Linda nos leía el libro, if I haven't clarified who else is with me, then I might want to do it. Linda nos leía el libro a mí y a Frederico. Linda read the book to us, to me, and Frederick, to clarify who us is. Not necessary with me or te. We know who me and you are. All right. Finally, let's look at some of the rules of the road. Now, this is one of those things where your subconscious brain is really good at picking these things up. But when you're going back in your conscious brain and you're trying to edit yourself or do grammar analysis, these are good to know. So, in general, grammar structure-wise, indirect objects always go in front of direct objects. Doesn't matter where you place them, indirect goes in front of direct if you have them both. Now remember, there are situations where you don't have both. Here, Miguel le respondió, there's only an indirect object. There's no direct object. So I've only got an indirect object there. Here, lo terminó en 2 días, there's only a direct object. There is not an indirect object. So I've only got the direct object there. But when you have both, indirect will always go in front of direct, where we have se lo dio, and I think that's my only example. Se lo dio, indirect, direct, and then my verb. Let's get into that. All right. Where we put them. We can put our indirect followed by our direct objects. If we have both, we can put them in front of a verb. If we do that, we write them as separate words like here, where we say, se lo dio. We've got a space in between each of those. There are 3 separate words, se lo dio. My indirect followed by my direct objects are in front of my verb. Great. You have another choice. If you have a sentence with an infinitive verb, a non-conjugated verb, or a verb that still ends in R, either AR, ER, IR, you can tack on your indirect and direct objects in that order to the end of the infinitive verb and write it all as one word. I'll come up with an example for you in just a moment. Either of these are fine. If you have the option, you can use either. However, take note, if you don't have an infinitive verb like in this sentence, se lo dio para la Navidad, there's no infinitive verb here. Dio is conjugated, so I can't go with structure number 2. I have to use structure number 1. And just a note for you, you are never going to put the indirect and direct object between a conjugated verb and an infinitive verb. That's something that comes up when you have like a verb combination, puedo tener, quiero ir. Those 2 verbs go together. The first one's conjugated, the second one's not. You can't put indirect and direct objects between those verbs. You've got to either put it in front of the conjugated verb, in front of both verbs, or you've got to tack it on to the end of your infinitive. All right, let's come up with a couple of final examples. All right, to wrap up, we have an example. We're going to use the phrase quiero comprar, where we put 2 verbs together, meaning I want to buy. And I'm going to say that we're talking about una computadora, a computer, which, by the way, una is feminine. And I'm talking about myself. All right. Me la quiero comprar. I'm going to follow my rules. I'm putting my indirect object in front of my direct object. So I'm going me la. And I picked the la because una computadora is a singular feminine thing. And if I ask myself, what is it that I want to buy? A computer. Who do I want to buy it to or for? I want to buy it for me. Okay. Me la quiero comprar. I have put my direct and indirect and direct object in front of the verbs. Me la quiero comprar. That's perfectly acceptable. I want to buy it for me. I can also tack these on to the end of an infinitive verb, which I have. Comprar is in the infinitive. So I can say, quiero comprármela. I want to buy it for me. Same thing. They translate the same way. They're both perfectly grammatically correct. However, I am never going to put my indirect or direct objects between a conjugated verb and an infinitive verb. So I would never say, quiero me la comprar. You will confuse a Spanish speaker. It's not going to make any sense. All right. One final note here for you is that technically when you are adding things on to the end of a verb, you are changing where the natural emphasis lies in that verb. So you add an accent, and you know what, for some reason this isn't looking right to me, but you do have to watch when you start adding things on to the end of verbs. You do have to maintain the original pronunciation of that word, and so you may need to add an accent. I'll save that for another video. All right, I hope this has been thorough enough to help you, short enough to be digestible. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you in our next class or training video. Have a great day, you guys.